Introducing Toned Max from LVC Audio. Toned Max combines the familiarity of modern digital equalizers with analog modeling and an intuitive workflow. The diverse feature set make Toned Max the perfect tool for mixing and mastering workflows. At first glance, Toned Max presents itself as a versatile mixing and mastering equalizer. However, when we dive deeper into the advanced features, we find a wealth of indispensable tools designed to simplify your workflow and help you mix faster. When we open Toned Max, we see a familiar EQ layout with 5 active bands. To the left is a 100 Hz low shelf with a 12 dB per octave slope. As expected, boosting this frequency brings forward the low end of your mix. Changing the slope value to 6 dB per octave provides a very gentle and wide boost. This setting will deactivate the Q control on the control panel, leaving a broad shelf ideal for transparently shaping your sound while minimizing phase artifacts. The low and high shelves offer a wide range of useful slope options, reaching up to a surgical 96 dB per octave. Increasing the Q value will create a resonant bump around the corner frequency. This resonant behavior can also be found on the analog shelving filters, as well as each of the low and high pass filters, the band pass filter, and the tilt filter. Any band can be assigned to any of the 15 filter types, and Toned Max allows you to create up to 20 bands per instance. Creating a new band is as simple as double-clicking the analysis graph. A new band will be created at that location, and we can grab it with the mouse to intuitively find the right gain and frequency value. New bands will function in stereo mode, but can be individually set to impact the mid, side, left, or right portion of the stereo field. Holding Shift while clicking a band allows us to control the gain of the band without altering the frequency. Holding Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac will allow us to control the frequency of the band without altering the gain. Pressing Control will cause the frequency to snap to the nearest pitch. Control and Alt can be used together to locate the correct pitch without altering the gain. We can alter the Q value by scrolling the mouse wheel. Holding Shift while scrolling gives us more precise control. Together, these intuitive modifiers allow natural navigation of the user interface. If we right-click on a band, we see several useful options. We can create or delete bands, or reset the gain of a band to 0. We can also reset the gain of a band by double-clicking the gain control of that band in the control panel. However, when we use the control panel, we can only adjust a single band at a time. On the analysis graph, we can click and drag to select multiple bands at once. While the bands are still selected, we can control all of them simultaneously from the drop-down menu. In this way, we can reset multiple bands to 0 at the same time, while leaving other bands unaffected. We can also invert the gain of several bands at once, or change which part of the stereo field those bands are affecting. The keyboard modifiers will work for all selected bands simultaneously, allowing you to work with less effort. From the drop-down menu, we can change the filter type and slope of each band individually. We also find the dynamics and Q-Link options. Q-Link brings variable bandwidth behavior to the filters, allowing you to set different behavior for boosts and for cuts. This feature can also be found in the control panel, where we can see at a glance which behavior is set for which band. Positive Q-Link settings will indicate a proportional Q that narrows at extreme settings, and negative Q-Link settings show the opposite behavior, broadening the Q value at extreme settings. This allows us to mimic a wide variety of analog EQs by simply changing how each band responds based on what we need from that band. Each band has an optional dynamics section, which can be set for dynamic compression or dynamic expansion, regardless of whether the band is boosting or cutting. Activating dynamic mode on a band will bring the Dynamics tab into view, which allows us to control the attack, release, and threshold of the Dynamics processor. This processor is global, and all dynamic bands will respond based on these settings. This tab is only visible when one or more bands are in dynamic mode. When a band is set to positive, this band will expand from a flat curve after the signal crosses the threshold. This is useful for making sure certain frequency ranges are controlled as they become too prominent, or for lifting a frequency range up to create dynamic movement. When a band is set to negative, this band will attenuate toward a flat curve every time the signal crosses the threshold. We can use this for controlling difficult frequency ranges such as the low end of a bass guitar. To the left side of the control panel, we find the Analog tab. This allows us to control the nonlinear behavior of Toned Max by enabling us to choose how much analog character we want at the input stage and the output stage independently. These controls blend in the nonlinear behavior of popular analog units, allowing us to mimic the behavior of analog circuitry if we wish. We can choose from 7 modeled input circuits and 6 modeled output circuits. At 100%, all of the incoming signal is being sent through the modeled analog circuitry. By adjusting the blend, we can achieve parallel saturation effects. Left-right variation will change the behavior of the left and right channels slightly, as though you were using separate physical circuits for each channel. This is a subtle effect, but it can add a sense of width to stereo tracks by creating slight differences between the left and right. The noise parameter will introduce subtle analog noise characteristics, allowing you to further mimic the behavior of your favorite hardware units. Above the Analog tab is the Gain tab. This allows you to control your gain structure, as well as the intensity of saturation coming from the Analog tab. The input and output controls by themselves are perfectly linear, providing a 24 dB range of control.
When things are a mess, you clean it up.
The drive control works in conjunction with the Analog tab, allowing you to control how much signal you're pushing through the analog stages. If the analog character is set to 0%, the drive control has no effect on the sound. When we blend analog character, the drive control allows us to control the intensity of the effect.
When no one else thinks it's needed, and you hold the flame.
We can use the clip control to set an internal ceiling above which we will experience soft clipping. This process is inactive by default, but can be set as low as -1 dB full scale. The LED next to this control indicates when clipping is occurring. Pressing the pre button moves the output gain control before the clip control in the signal path. Now we can use the output gain control to push into the clipper to create extreme clipping effects.
And hammer away. You are alive.
We find the Stereo tab to the bottom right of the control panel. This section allows us to control the width of our stereo field and is very useful for instrument buses or for the mix bus. The Stereo tab affects the audio after the EQ has been applied, but before the output section. The L mono control sums everything below the cutoff frequency to mono and has a range of 10 Hz to 500 Hz. The width knob controls how wide the stereo field will be. At settings below 100%, our stereo field will collapse toward the center. At 0%, our signal is now perfectly summed to mono. However, we can push above 100% to gain extra width from our mix, and the result will sum to mono perfectly every time. We can demonstrate this by summing the mix to mono on the master channel and increasing the width amount. Notice when we sum to mono, there is no change to the mix, even when we push to 300%. However, if we switch back to stereo, we now hear a very wide stereo spread. The high frequency control gently widens the stereo image of anything above the cutoff frequency. We can use this to add extra width to just the top end of our mix without changing the stereo field elsewhere.
When everyone else thinks it's gone, and not to send
We can alternatively use the wide link to gain extra control over the width of the high frequencies. With the wide link engaged, the width control now only affects the frequencies above the high frequency cutoff. Everything below the high frequency cutoff will be unaffected. The stereo tab also features a phase inversion option, a left-right swap option, and a vector scope to help visualize the stereo field of your mix. At the bottom of the interface, we can select which analysis type we wish to view. The waveform history panel shows the waveform that has already passed through the plugin, allowing you to visualize any changes that have been made. To the left of the waveform history panel, we find a resolution slider. This allows us to set the decibel range represented in the waveform history and has a range from -1 dB full scale to -100 dB full scale. We can control the speed of the scrolling waveform using the slider at the bottom right of the interface. While in waveform history view, we can view the input, output, or both simultaneously. We can even right-click the waveform history display to change the color of each waveform if we wish, allowing us to visually separate the input and output. We can also choose whether or not the RMS level is visible. When active, we see a yellow band on the waveform history display indicating the RMS level of our audio. We can customize the color and view options or hide this from view. Toned Max also features the FFT spectrum view, which is visible by default. Here we see the frequency spectrum of the output. We can customize this view in similar ways found in the waveform history display. One useful option in particular is the fill setting, which fills the frequency response with the color of your choice. We can use this to help us identify which instance of Toned Max we're currently using by setting the color to match the color scheme of your mix template. As a frequency becomes more intense, it becomes brighter in the filled area. This can help you quickly identify problematic resonances, which can then be addressed with the notch filter or a narrow dynamic band. To the left of the spectrum analysis window, we find a resolution slider. Here we can determine the workable range of the EQ when working from the main EQ window directly. When set to its lowest resolution, we are limited to gain changes of plus or minus 3 dB. While the moves may look drastic, they are actually quite subtle given their limited range. This allows us to work with a more detailed overview of our EQ moves, even though we're making very gentle overall boosts and cuts. The gain is only limited to the size of the window when interacting with the EQ nodes on the display. By using the gain control on the control panel, we can utilize the full 36 dB range of each band, and if we wish to visually work with the entire range, we can accomplish this by turning up the resolution to its maximum setting. Toned Max is impressively versatile and capable of replacing several tools in your template. There are further options to explore for those who wish to go deeper. Otherwise, Toned Max is a quite adaptable addition to any DAW-based workflow. Toned Max, available now from LVC Audio. Download the demo at lvcaudio.com.